Hello everybody. How you doing? I hope you're well wherever you are in the world. Yes, indeed, definitely. Um, why would anyone wish anyone ill? Anyway, right. So here we are. I'm here. You're here. There'll be others who'll arrive a bit later on. I hope Q's feeling a lot better than previously, even if it's taking a while. I do have a jigsaw puzzle that can be done today for anyone who would like to do it, so that's good. Put your hand up if you want to, or put the actually just put in the command for jigsaws. I should probably have on screen somewhere a list of commands that you guys can use, but I keep forgetting. That sort of stuff doesn't really matter. Just getting comfy. It's windy. I'm back in my office. The reason I say it's windy is because, yes, you can hear the noise of the wind in the chimney. I'm just going to let my hair down because it's time to let my hair down. Kind of. Just, it's fuzzy around the top at the moment with when I clip it back because it's been there all day. Get this. So it's all where it's meant to be. And I did figure out how to change my camera when I'm streaming from my camera from mirrored to what you usually use. So that's good for next time. That's one of the reasons why it's a good idea to actually still go back to using your old technology sometimes, just because it's a good idea to stay fresh with what you're doing. Right, so where are we up to? Elfrida accidentally gave away details about the gunpowder plot, didn't she? What effect is that going to have on the future of the English-speaking world and the lives of those people who were involved? Will they believe her? She's a child, after all, in their eyes. Probably still in ours too, but, children were considered to be very ignorant of anything that was going on in those days. So unless it was somebody who was particularly suspicious of anyone who didn't agree with them, then I hope that eventually we're going to get this one resolved. But we will see. It is a work of fiction. It is written for children. So that does give me hope that, we'll get past this point. But hopefully without too many people's lives being lost or threatened or anything else like that. So that Elfrida doesn't feel guilty for having badly affected history like that. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm just checking out what's happening on my other monitor here in case I need it. It's nice being back at my desk and being able to use all my usual technology, so that's good. I said last time I thought the book was published in 1907, but it wasn't actually. It was published in 1908. There you go. I have got next to me on my other browser, Wikipedia is open so that I can check up on if there's any particular points of interest that grab my attention. I'm now looking for a pen or a pencil on my desk so I can write things down. Pencil, paper for writing notes on, the usual. Did you figure out what a mangelwurzel was? Did you? I did ask that one other time and I had no replies whatsoever. I knew what one was anyway, but I want to know if you guys actually looked it up. I know I say I don't give you homework, but kind of. There was apparently a small boat that came ashore off the moorings and got smashed up. Last time we had a really bad storm like this, the same happened, except that time the boat didn't get completely smashed. I haven't seen photographs of it. It's kind of just one of those things that happens in our area because most of the time the moorings out in the bay from where we are reasonably sheltered because of where the line of rocks from the point of land pokes out, because they form a barrier to the sea that comes in through the gap between the island and the other headland way across the bay. But every now and then we get a storm from the northeast and it just blows and blows and blows and blows, and it can cause boats to chafe through their mooring lines and then come ashore on the beach. So I think we probably had the fire brigade out putting tarpaulins over people's roofs as usual. It seems to happen every time we have a big blow, but we don't tend to get tornadoes that rip roofs off houses or anything like that, so it's not generally quite so bad in that respect, unlike parts of North America. I've got friends who live in Oklahoma in an area where they actually have tornado sirens and anytime they go off, you get down into the basement, the lockable, completely underground, safe type basement, just so that if your house does get whipped away by the wind, you are not. That to me is a bit beyond what I think of as being a normal, safe, okay place to live. Yes, I'm glad that no one was hurt as well. Yes, thank you. I haven't heard anything more about it. I think it's just one of those things where, yeah, it happens. There are quite a few boats out on the moorings at the moment that have been there for quite a long time without anyone checking on them. So often, storm sellers, that's what they're called, yes. Often those boats don't have anyone going to maintain them and things like that. So those of us who are locals aren't surprised when they come ashore so much. Disappointing, but if you never ever look at it, you never ever go and check it or use it or anything like that. It's been there for 3 years. It's got horrible sea life, plant growth growing off the bottom of the boat because you can't be bothered looking after it. Why do you even have the boat? Anyway, that sort of thing. Yeah, thankfully we don't have need of a storm cellar, but we kind of do have a storm cellar. We've got our house is unusual in that it's built out of concrete slabs that are all fastened together and have concrete around the reinforcing steel from one panel connects to the floor and all sorts of things like this, and bits and pieces bolted and very strong, all that sort of thing. And part of the way it was built, we ended up with this space that was holding up the main floor, which is the one below me, from the basement up to the main floor, and the main floor is concrete as well. And the space between the rental apartment downstairs, it's a 1 to 2 bedroom little unit which a friend lives in, and the garage has in the front of it the stairwell, and it's a nice big stairwell with a stair that goes around the outside edge with an open space in the middle, like you have in historic houses. This is what comes of living overseas and travelling overseas and visiting historic houses. You see things and you think, how can we do that in a modern house? We came up with it for our own house anyway. So we've got this big open stairwell, and in behind that space, half of behind that space is the laundry and bathroom area for the apartment, and the other half, it was like, the engineer was like, well, can we just put this other stairwell wall all the way through to the back wall of the house just to make it nice and strong? And we said, yeah, sure. And it left us with a space that was not quite 6 foot wide, probably 4.5 feet wide, but the full half of the width of the house. And so that's our larder, that's our storage space, because it's a relatively stable temperature there. It's got the ground behind the back wall of it, because the house is built on a slope, and in New Zealand with a lot of the not the more modern houses, but the slightly older ones. If the hill's like this, you have the main floor of the house at this level, and then you have your garage and basement down at this level, where part of it's dug into the ground. So you have a wall down here, and then it comes along like this, and this level here is at ground level, so you can drive your cars into the garage. So that's where it's at the back of that space, where it's up against the ground here with this concrete wall along the back. So it's very stable for temperature, and it also means that it's very, very quiet if we've got a really, really bad storm going on outside. Sometimes I get overwhelmed by noise, and I've been known to go down there, take a beanbag, my headphones, so I can listen to something. That's where our services are, all through that space too. So our wiring, our internet connection and everything is all sorted through that space. And so that's where the router is for our fibre connection. So you've got good internet there. As long as there's power, we have internet. And it just means that it's a nice quiet space to sit in. But it's also where all the tinned food and dried goods and all that sort of stuff are stored, which we do, not because I'm worried about a disaster happening, the whole world system's collapsing. Nobody would last long with that sort of thing unless they actually were in a supermarket and could stop everyone getting in. No, the reason why I have that is because all of my life, there have been times where I've had no access to a vehicle. And in the earlier days, not that long ago, you couldn't order groceries and have them paid for with a credit card over the phone or anything like that. We didn't have the internet back then. So therefore, if you had the opportunity to get goods that were storable, you would get them and have them stored and available, and you rotate them so you get new stock goes behind the old stock and it doesn't get too old and all that sort of stuff. You just live that way because you're used to having times when you can't get out and get groceries. We've just always done it that way. It's part of my upbringing. It's part of living in a more rural part of the country where it used to seem like a very long time to get from where you lived into town where the supermarket was. It wasn't. It's only 10 minutes away, 10 or 15 minutes away by car. But it always felt like it. And if you lived in the day where you didn't have a vehicle, or there was one vehicle for the whole of the household and that was off at a workplace and you were living at home, you did that. It also means you can buy things when they're on special. All the sort of stuff that you really want to be able to. I'm just going to allow that comment to go through. I think if I can. Don't quite know how to do that. Yeah, sorry about that, Q. It was just the length of what you wrote there was a little bit too long. I'll see if I can put that in for you. And because it's my channel, I think I can probably put that in without it being banned. Yeah, sorry about that. Just one of those things. Oh, there's a whole bunch of them. Goodness me. Why did it time you out for all of those things? That's strange. I'm just going to have a look at my settings here and see if there's anything else going on. Any damage from the storm at all was the first one. Sorry, I didn't see these going on before. Any damage from the storm at all. Glad no one was hurt with the boat, which I did actually see. And then for some, it might have been just because of the other one that because you put in the extra long one, then it timed out all of the other comments that you'd made, which is why I was puzzled about the fact that I saw what you'd said in the main chat and then it disappeared it. Anyway, sorry about that. You didn't live where you are now during the storms, but your parents did. All good on the rest, no worries. Yeah. So I'm just going to read this out for those because I'm interacting with our chat. There are people who are going to be watching this on YouTube later on who are wondering what I'm talking about. So I'm going to read out the comments that have been written on chat. This is one of the reasons why people join in live instead of just watching a recording later on, is because then you get to see what the conversation is that's going on in the background. So Q had said, our winters here, you'd have a storeroom, especially for overwinter, where people could need these big buses, on treads to get to the main areas or between towns. Yes, we have vehicles similar to those down at what we used to call the snow. In North Island of New Zealand, there's a central area which has 3 mountains very close together. It's what we call National Park. That's the name of the park, is National Park. And it's got these 3 snowy mountains in it. They're all volcanic, obviously, but dormant. Actually, no. Semi-dormant. One of them is active but doesn't tend to throw out lava but has steam and all sorts of stuff like that. We had one of them erupt when we were living over in England and we lost a few feet off the top of it. Anyway, so that's Ruapehu, Ngarahoe and Tongariro, and it's Tongariro National Park, Tongaro, in case you're looking it up. So these mountains, they used to have these buses that they almost looked ex-military, but they had these huge wheels, and then sometimes if they were going further up the mountains, they would have a rubber track that would go around the wheel base or something like that. I can't remember what it was, to be able to get up. We used to call them the goats or something like that because they could get up places that a normal vehicle couldn't. And yes, North America, especially in Canada, because it's further up, closer to the pole, North Pole, can get very, very cold and snowbound or icebound. for those who aren't used to Canada at all. So having food that's available that you have in storage is very important, because you don't want to starve to death just because you can't get into town to get your groceries because the roads are all blocked up with snow and ice. There you go. And just going back, I'm pretty sure that there was somebody else said something. Yeah, Jonathan said it sounds like an amazing storage space. Very, very handy. And nice to have a quiet space. When we had 9 people living in the house, 9 adults in the house during the first COVID lockdown here in New Zealand, there were a few times I took my beanbag down and my headphones and my laptop or my phone and just sat in the quiet. Oh, yeah. Anyway, so such a wide variety of places that we all live and have lived at different times too. Sorry, I'm just warming up a little now. It's time to take off the cardigan. I'm just looking to see. Yeah, I do know people who have swum out to the boats. Sorry, just referencing another comment that got removed because of coleslaw being timed out. I'd swim out there and explore them, the boats that are out, the abandoned boats out on the moorings. There are a few people who do that from time to time, but you can't sort of really tell someone, your boat is left and we need you to do something about it, unless you're the council. And most of us don't know who owns which boats because we just never see these people. Anyway, that's all that. So, yeah, we've survived the storm. We had the council contractors come in and deal with some branches that had fallen down off trees and an old dead tree that had fallen over in the park next to us. I'm pointing over here. I'm waving over here because there's through the front wall of my house and across the lawn, down the slope of the lawn, is where a couple of small paddocks start, fields, and that's where the donkeys sometimes are, and that's where there's 18 acres and whatever that is in hectares, and I should be able to tell you what that is, 18 acres of public park, commonly known as Highfield Reserve. 18 acres in hectares. And I'll tell you what it is. It's 7.28434. 7.2 or 7.3 hectares. If you are used to that sort of land area, I actually, for some strange reason, still think in terms of acres, not hectares. I can't visualize a hectare. Anyway, so, right, where are we up to? I suppose I should introduce myself to anybody else who's new here. Anybody who's new here. Here we go. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old children's books, and yes, I have one handy, but I'm not reading from this one today. So these are the sort of books that I grew up reading, where they have old book smell, very old book smell. You can feel the print on the pages. The illustrations are made with, often are made with lots of lines to make the shape of a drawing, like scratches made on the printing plate, and then the ink is rubbed into them. You can't quite see it there. A very fine version compared with often the faces on currency, dollar bills and that sort of stuff are done, or used to be done, in a similar manner, but with much thicker, more permanent ink than what these are. Anyway, so these are the sort of books that I grew up reading. Not always as old as this. This one's 125 years old, and it was given to my grandmother's brother, who was much older than her, because she was the youngest in the family and he was one of the oldest. I read old children's books because those are the books that I grew up reading, and I loved them. And I also was aware as I was growing up that there were a whole lot of things I understood about the world and the way things functioned and how we fitted into history. Not that I knew detailed history, but how we, in our timeline, are in part a result of the history that has gone, but well, we're completely, plus our own choices, a result of what has gone before us in previous times. And how you didn't feel quite so isolated and totally responsible for the whole world falling apart, because it wasn't just your fault, it was actually the result of everyone's decisions over time. All of those sort of aspects come from reading books from different places and different time periods, instead of just reading media or partaking of media that is created entirely within your own current lifespan. it changes your outlook on the world. It changes the way you approach other people. And when I started to realize that a lot of people didn't have this sort of understanding, I started to value what I had been reading all the more, and read to my children as they were growing up, and also encouraged them to read for themselves. One of my children was mad keen on the Asterix comics, and was not yet at the stage of being able to read them for themselves, and so therefore I read them out loud. Comics are not usually the sort of book that you read out loud. It's kind of a weird thing in some ways, and yet it worked. They got to the stage where they would want me to keep reading, and I had work to do, so I would say, you read the bits that you can, because they were starting to learn to read. You read the bits that you can, and then sound out the words that you don't know. And if you still can't do that, you show me on the page those words, and I'll help you to sound them out. And their hunger to know more of what was happening in the story, because of what they could see in the pictures, actually helped to motivate them to keep on trying to read. They're a very fluent reader now. Actually, both of my kids are. One of them's dyslexic, and none of us realised until they had left school. They were working, and someone who was actually a dyslexia assessor, as well as having a severely dyslexic child themselves, said, "You wouldn't happen to be dyslexic, would you?" And my child said, "I don't know why." And this lady said, "Well, you're showing a lot of, not the reading signs of it, but there's different ways of thinking that are in common with people who have dyslexia. They process what they see differently to how a lot of people who don't have dyslexia do. Spatial relationships of things, being able to imagine something in your head, turn it around, look at it and stuff like that. I can do that well anyway, but I don't have dyslexia. But that's very, very common in people who do have dyslexia, some particular aspect of that." And the lady said, "Well, yeah, very definitely you are dyslexic." Funny thing is, that child is an avid reader, not just enjoying audiobooks, but actually getting books out of the library when they were growing up, working at the library when they were growing up. It was one of their first jobs, unpaid. Very, very fluent reader, but don't make them slow down because the words start to dance around on the page. Let them skim read, and they will get all of the meaning out of the page that there is there to get, that's actually written there. They have no problem with it. But make them slow down and sound out all the words the way I was showing the other one how to do it. Doesn't work for them. Different things, different people. Anyway, they're both good readers. They both love reading, and it's a great way to be able to entertain yourself. Anyway, that's the background on me reading. Yeah, so a lot of the books I grew up reading were ones that my parents and my grandparents had, the actual physical copies that they had. So that's a big part of it. I read public domain books, ones that are no longer held within copyright, just because otherwise I believe that it's a form of stealing, and people put a lot of work into producing a book, especially if they're self-published, but other people do as well. And I don't think it's right to actually take that away from them if you realise just how little they actually earn from what they write individually. There are a few people who make a lot of money out of it. Big name bestsellers such as Lee Child and those sort of ones live comfortably off it, but your average author does not. And so therefore I don't believe it's the right thing to do to read something in a public context where someone does not receive something back by way of compensation. And don't tell me that you're giving them publicity, because publicity does not pay for their groceries at the store. Honestly, have you tried going into the supermarket and saying, here's some publicity, now you can give me my groceries, and see if they let you do that or not? I don't think they will. Anyway, all of that, I won't rant any further. But public domain readers, I am part of a group of people called Codex, and we all read public domain books on Twitch. Some of us also put the videos over onto YouTube. Codex. I'm going to give you the link for Codex's Discord. So there's the Codex Discord. The Discord is not just for Codex readers, it's also for anyone else who's interested in old stories and stuff like that. They do a book club once a month, but it's in suspension just at the moment because it's public holidays in the Northern Hemisphere generally, so everyone gets extra busy. They also have a movie club, which I know absolutely nothing about. They're a wonderful bunch of people, and if you want to actually visit them all on Twitch and listen to them when they're reading or watch them playing games, because most of them play games and stuff like that as well, then if you look below my main header on my About Me page on Twitch, there is a section there that says Codex, like it does in that image over there, and there are links to all of their Twitch channels, and so you can go follow those links to their Twitch channels, follow them as broadcasters, subscribe to them as well if you'd like to, interact with them, join in on the Codex Discord server and get to know more about them, because all of us have bios over there. I don't have one in the reader section, I have one just in the general introduction section. I should probably do a proper reader's intro for Codex. Haven't got that far yet. Mind you, I happen to know one of the other readers who only just did it reasonably recently, and they've been part of Codex for quite a lot longer than me. Anyway, so that's Codex. I also have a Discord myself, which is very quiet. I did put up some new pictures the other day, just before the last time I read actually, and occasionally we have a chat over there, or Jonathan will ask about a word that he's come across that he hasn't been able to track down, just because it's a great place to actually discuss, where do you think this comes from? What do you think it means? All that sort of stuff. So if I ask about a word here and we are no longer reading when you find out and you want to tell us about it, come and write it in the discussion about words and things like that section on my Discord server. I'm pretty sure there's one there that talks about words and things like that. But you can also make suggestions for other books to read. Speaking of other books, I have actually been in contact with the estate of an author who, in New Zealand, their books are now out of copyright, but in England, where the author is from and where the books were originally published, they are still within copyright, because that particular time period, New Zealand has a different length of time for copyright holding. Technically, legally, in New Zealand, I can read those books for public broadcast within New Zealand, which is what Twitch is, except that it's not within New Zealand only. But I'm not going to be reading it here on Twitch at this stage because I don't have permission, because I'm not going to violate that copyright here on Twitch, nor put it up onto YouTube either, because that's also international. So because they're now into their summer holidays, it may be quite a while before I hear anything. Hopefully they will give us permission for me to be able to read them. I would really love to. I have copies, hardback copies of the books from when I first realised I could actually buy these books secondhand, obviously. There's a few of them I had to get the paperbacks because the hardbacks are very hard to get these days. But I would love to be able to read them to you guys, because they fit the sector of reading age range that I really enjoy. But I won't be reading them if they don't say I can. So we'll see. It may take a few more months yet before I actually hear back from them, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. You can be crossing your fingers and your toes and your legs and everything else, and praying and anything else that you feel like doing to sort of bring about the sort of positive response from them. But otherwise, you just have to come back here in 20 years' time and I'll read them to you. Actually, I think it might be 15 years' time, because they've been out of copyright for New Zealand for a little while already. Anyway, so that concludes my intro for newbies, except that I have 3 tips. First tip is something to drink. Second tip is something to snack on. And the third tip is something or somewhere comfortable to sit. So the first tip, I always have... smashing up my light. No, not quite smashing it, just bumping it. I always have water, because it keeps the brain working well. It keeps the body working well, and it means that your throat doesn't dry out. I usually actually drink from this, not that lovely purple bottle. I love that one. That's the one I started with. But this one here, if I take the lid off and bump it, it's going to just spread water everywhere, and we don't want that next to our electronics. So water. I also have coffee, as you've seen me slurping on already, And if you saw my Instagram post to say that I was going to be reading today, you would have seen me making it. But snacks, tip 2, I have ginger nuts. Hands up those who know what ginger nuts are. And I also have some more of my Finnish organic licorice. I think it's organic. So there you go, yummy snacks for today. Ginger nuts, New Zealand Griffin's ginger nuts. So I'll put that way around so you can see it. Very, very noisy cellophane wrapper. I'll take a couple out of the packet so you can see what they look like, and you can see if they look anything like what you have. So ginger nuts, these are ginger nuts. Turn them around a little bit so you can see them better. And hopefully, there, yes, my camera can now see ginger nuts instead of my face. So they're about this thick. They are very hard. Yummy. Yes, wonderful. I'm glad you did. Thank you, Jonathan. I don't know who it is that's receiving them, but I'm delighted that you did. When we were living in England for 4 years, we had friends who would send us a twin pack of ginger nuts every now and then. They are similar to ginger snaps, but I think that they are a lot harder. And so if I eat them, I will be eating them carefully. We tend to bite them with our back teeth because they're so hard, or you dunk them in your drink, such as hot coffee or something like that. But there you go. That's how hard they are. I'm reasonably strong. That you can smash them if you drop them on the floor, but they are hard. Whereas most biscuits in New Zealand are nowhere near that hard. But yeah, they are related to ginger snaps, and they're quite gingery. So that was drinks, snacks, and somewhere comfortable or something comfortable. So I always have this cushion here to remind me about get yourself comfortable. I'm on this chair instead of my normal office chair just because it is more comfortable for what I'm doing. It doesn't squeak as much. Doesn't poke up as much at the back either. So it doesn't look like I've got a black tombstone behind me. And also, if you need it, if you're not feeling well, make sure you've got a stream buddy to sit with you. Something comfortable, something familiar, something positive and friendly to help you to enjoy the book instead of worrying about anything else that's going on around you. This is Quest Sprout. And Quest Sprout has 2 little green leaves on their head, which is why you can't see them, because it's the right sort of green for my computer to pick up with the green screen. Quest Sprout is associated with a webcomic called Swords Comic, written and drawn by another Kiwi called Matthew. And actually, I should just see if I can give you a link. Lots of fun. He's got a Discord server as well, a whole lot of things like that. And you can actually go through all of the Swords comics in numerical order, or he's also got them sorted by main character, so you can follow a storyline about one character, all that sort of stuff. Lots of fun. Some of them, most of them are not as the characters are not as sweet as Quest Sprout, because they're all swords and the characters who use the swords, things like that. Lots of fun. And so Quest Sprout has been said to be, I shall tell you, Quest Sprout, hang on. So you remember everything was really horrible with having to go into lockdowns all around the world and things like this with COVID. Well, I shall read this little wee bit to you from the BBC website. BBC? UK? Not New Zealand. Okay. BBC website, their Newsbeat section, and written in October 2020. Quest Sprout, the most wholesome thing on the internet. There you go. He's a cute little character. He's a cartoon character, and the plushie was made based on that. So I will give you the link for that particular article. It's delightful. But go and also give Matthew a follow on Twitter or Instagram or whatever else like that. Bookmark the page so you can go back and see the next comic spread for each week, that sort of stuff. It's all worth it. Let's all support each other. Right, I think that's it. I've covered all the 3 tips. Yes, as Jonathan had said, tips. Maybe I need to do some emotes that actually cover the 3 tips. That would be funny. I just realised I've got a red spot on my lip. I think I've split my lip. Just one of those things that happens in winter just because your skin gets a little bit drier than it should be. Right, so how about we read a book? It's after 3:30. I've been nattering for too long. So where are we up to? We've had the children or the child? No, the children went back to the era of the gunpowder plot. Now I shall tell you which section this is. 1605. There you go. That's a long time ago. The gunpowder plot and the Tower of London and things like this. And we have actually just found out that Elfrida has been taken to the tower as a traitor because she knows about this plot, which means she's in on it, according to them. Oh dear. So we're going to carry on with reading. So we've got Lady Arden, the one who was the current Lady Arden in 1605, was it? Yes, 1605. And Edred, this is Elfrida's brother, who's 9 years old, and Elfrida herself, who's 11 years old. I think I've got those right. They are now in the Tower of London. And I was so looking for a jigsaw puzzle of the Tower of London to be able to show you what it looks like. Actually, I'll just see if I can find a picture of it for you, since I can't actually find a jigsaw puzzle for you. What's a good one? This one's a good one to show you. Sorry. To show you what it looks like in such a way that you realise that this is not a pleasant place to be. Plus, where's plus? Actually, it's probably better if I just save that image and then just pull it up as one of my images. Normally, that would make more sense, wouldn't it? And then we'll get started reading. Tower of London. This is actually just part of it. This is the White Tower, which is the one that most people think of when they think of the Tower of London. It's been around for a long time. I'm just... no, I just saw an old picture of it, and I was looking for a date on it, but it doesn't have it in a way that I can translate for you. It describes it, the era, rather than actually saying this is when it was, which would make it a lot easier to follow. Save image. Yes, please. These are probably going to be huge. And let's see if I can put them in here. Image. We'll get there. We'll be there shortly. Tower. Come on. Tower. Okay, that one's got a number in front of it. So this is the White Tower, which is huge and quite impressive, and would in its own way, if you were stuck inside it, be, yes, I'm bringing it back, be rather scary. Okay? A lot of the rooms in it were used as prison cells for important prisoners. That's part of the Tower of London. That's called the White Tower. Okay? Been there, had a visit, all that sort of stuff. Got the guided tour. Just finding the other picture, which I have here, which is, okay, so this is the Thames down here, the river. This has a roadway along it. It used to be more of kind of like a barrier, an island, and then where that archway is there used to be where they would row boats into the grounds of the tower. So it was accessed from the river. So when you had a prisoner who was taken to be put in the tower at a certain part of the time period that they were using it as a prison, then they would row them in through this gateway, and it was this big dark, if you're in a small boat that's being rowed in under this archway down here, you'd feel like you were going into the bowels of the earth. It would have been quite psychologically quite stressful. Anyway, so there's the White Tower in the centre of it. This whole complex here is the Tower of London, these walls here, and also the grounds over here a little bit too. It's obviously had the city built up right around it. Sorry, just running over my clothes with my chair. It's obviously had the city built up right around it, and but that complex, a lot of that complex was there at the time that we're reading about, and it was in use for prisoners associated with things like all of that sort of stuff to do with the gunpowder plot and anything like that. Anyone who was against whoever was running the country at the time, if they were an important person or associated with an important person, that's probably where they would get sent. Your average ordinary criminals, that's not where they went. But these were the ones that you really wanted to keep an eye on and that sort of stuff. So how about we get on with reading the story instead of just talking? I think that would be a good idea. So here we go. Sorry. Trying to get myself focused. So I'll just read the last sentence or part of it. It was Elfrida as she felt, hang on, they were traitors to king and parliament made no difference to the fact that it was part of history rather than the timeline that Elfrida and Edred are from. So in her mind, she's partly saying, well, I didn't actually change history. And then she's also saying, but I actually still said things that I shouldn't have had and betrayed people I shouldn't have betrayed. And so even if she knows that she probably hasn't changed history, she still feels bad about what she's done. So later when they're there, Elfrida lay awake long after Lady Arden and Edred were sleeping peacefully and hated herself, calling herself a traitor, a coward, and an utter duffer, for having just sort of shown off her knowledge of history, because that was what she had been doing. So, chapter 9, which is where we're up to. Chapter 9. Does anyone... Oh, puzzle, sorry. I'll get on with some reading in a minute. There you go, Jigsaw. There's the link for it, I think. I think that's the link for it. We'll find out if anyone wants to do it, if that's working. Let me know in the chat if it doesn't work. And I'll sort something else out. Imprisoned in the Tower of London, accused of high treason, and having confessed to a too intimate knowledge of the gunpowder plot, Elfrida could not help feeling that it would be nice to be back again in her own time, and at Arden, where if you left events alone and didn't interfere with them by any sort of magic Mouldiwarpness, nothing dangerous, romantic or thrilling would ever happen. And yet, when she was there, as you know, she never could let events alone. Yes. She and Edred could not be content with that castle and that house which, even as they stood, would have made you and me so perfectly happy, because it's a piece of real history that they're actually living in and exploring, but because they know that they can actually explore some other time periods, it makes them a bit restless, I think. They wanted the treasure. The treasure referred to here is the jewels and valuables from some particular part of their family history, which has meant that because they were lost, probably hidden away, the family has nothing with which to maintain the castle. And they have heard that there's this legend that they were hidden away, and the children want to find them so that they can actually have some way of maintaining upgrading, repairing the house, and maybe the ruins of the castle a bit too. So we'll see what happens. They wanted the treasure, and they, Elfrida especially, wanted adventures. Well, now they had got an adventure. Yes. Both of them. There was no knowing how it would turn out either, and that, after all, is the essence of adventure. It wouldn't be adventure if it wasn't uncomfortable, honestly. Edred was lodged with Lord Arden and several other gentlemen in the White Tower. That's that one I was showing you, the big chunky one. And Elfrida and Lady Arden were in quite a different part of the building, of the tower complex is what they mean by that. And yes, there were cells all over the place and suites of rooms that were, it was still a prison for a lot of people, but not necessarily as rough as what some of the other parts were. Anyway, the children were not allowed to meet. This, of course, made it impossible for either of them to try to get back to their own times, for though they sometimes quarrelled, as you know, they were really fond of each other, and most of us would hesitate to leave even a person we were not very fond of, alone, a prisoner in the tower in the time of James I and the gunpowder plot. Elfrida had to wait on her mother and... Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out what the sense is in the sentence, because it didn't quite go the way I was expecting it to. So I was pre-reading the sentence. Elfrida had to wait on her mother and to sew at the sampler, which had been thoughtfully brought by the old nurse with her lady's clothes and the clothes Elfrida wore. So in the story, Elfrida is the daughter of the Lady Arden, that she has been locked up with. In the time-travelling part of the story, whereas Elfrida knows that she's not, that she is a great something niece, grandniece, or grandchild, or something like that in connection with it. So, yeah, but she can't really explain that to her because the idea of time travel was way beyond anyone's idea, understanding at the time. Anyway, so the old nurse had brought in these things for them to do as well as clothes to wear, because in those days it wasn't all provided for you. If you had any way of getting it from friends and family, then please do so, otherwise you are going to do without. But there were no games, and the only out-of-doors Elfrida could get was on the very narrow terrace where dead flower stalks stuck up out of a still narrower border, beside a flagged pathway where there was just room for one to walk and not two. From this terrace you could see the fat, queer-looking ships in the river and the spire of St. Paul's. Now this St. Paul's, I would guess, is the old St. Paul's. Let's see if we can find out what that used to look like, because the fire of London burnt down the old St. Paul's, and then they built the new St. Paul's, which is the one that Sir Christopher Wren designed, the one with the curved dome. When did that happen? The Great Fire of London. (1666). There you go. I should have remembered that one. And so this is set in 1605, so she is seeing the spire of the old St. Paul's. Let's see if we can find a picture of it. Old St. Paul's Cathedral. Wikipedia to our rescue. And here we go, a digital reconstruction of probably what it looked like, something like this. I shall show you in just a minute. Go back to this here, change the image. And the reason I'm doing this all on the fly at the moment is just because I don't actually pre-read the chapters in the book. I like having the fun of discovering it with you most of the time. Every now and then something will give me a little bit, I think maybe I should have read that one before, but you know, that's just the way life is. And I'm now trying to resize it so you'll be able to see it. So this is as if it were no, not that one, this one. So this is a recreation of what they think it would have looked like. It's a digital recreation. This is the style of the cathedral. before the Great Fire of London. This is what these days we would call a Gothic cathedral. Yes, Jonathan, 1666. Of course, you know, because I don't remember that part of history, and Jonathan's reading up on all this sort of stuff, and I should give you a shout out just for those who haven't seen what he's doing. So Jonathan is reading a lot of old history documents, letters, court records, all that sort of stuff to use as the basis for a computer game, because he wants it to be based on what things were like at the time that the story is set, and referencing real things that happened with real people. So this is back to what I was doing. This is what St. Paul's would have looked like, this style of church, this style of cathedral. Yeah, you're most welcome, Jonathan. He says he bows politely. So this is the style of cathedral that would have been built at the time. It would have started a long time back, and it would have grown and grown and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, as opposed to the one that has that curved dome and its white stonework, very iconic to any picture of London these days. So this is the spire she would have been looking at, because these days we don't really think of the roof of the current St. Paul's as being a spire, because it doesn't have that sharp pointy shape to it. Anyway, so I'll turn that off for now and carry on with reading. So she could see it from there, from the walk, this narrow little walkway that she can walk on in the tower. The fat, queer-looking ships in the river and the spire of St. Paul's. The fat, queer-looking ships are because the sort of ships she's used to are a lot more sleek. The older ones, if you've seen pictures of, I don't know, hard to describe, but the ones that were square-rigged, where they had sails that were the shape of the screen, that sort of thing, as opposed to triangular ones, which are a much more efficient one for going towards nearer towards where the wind is coming from. Completely different style of sailing. The older ones were very slow and took a lot of people to work them, because you had to have people up on the rigging to move things and pull ropes, as well as people down on the deck and all that sort of stuff. And they were really chunky boats. They were used the way these days we use trucks, and if you're in England, lorries, that sort of thing. So a lot of these boats were used for carrying freight. And that's the sort of boat you would see in the river in London, because the Thames at that point, the Thames is being used as their main source of freighting things around. If you could take it by water, it was a lot easier than taking it over land. Seriously, a lot easier. You can carry a lot more in a boat than you can on a cart. Right, carrying on. So from this terrace, you could see the fat, queer-looking ships in the river and the spire of St. Paul's. Edred was more fortunate. Kind of. He was allowed to play in the garden of the lieutenant of the tower. So this is the chap that's in charge of people, I suppose. And it could be because he's a child. But he did not feel much like playing. He wanted to find Elfrida and get back to Arden. Everyone was very kind to him, but he had to be very much quieter than he was used to being. Children were seen and not heard, maybe. And to say sir and madam, and not to speak till he was spoken to. Very unmodern. You have no idea how tiresome it is not to speak till you are spoken to, with the world full as it is of 1,000 interesting things that you want to ask questions about. Probably stops him getting in trouble for not knowing about things, though. One day, for there were quite a number of days, Edred met someone who seemed to like answering questions, and this made more difference than perhaps you would think. Edred was walking one bright summer morning in the private garden of the lieutenant of the tower, and he saw coming towards him a very handsome old gentleman dressed in very handsome clothes, and what's more, the clothes blazed with jewels. So I don't know if he's a visitor or if he's a prisoner, but in this era, if you qualified for being somewhere that was a special lock-up area like the Tower of London, you took with you your own stuff. to a certain extent. So therefore, if you dressed really well, then you still dressed really well. That's just the way it was. So very handsome clothes, and what's more, the clothes blazed with jewels. Now most of the gentlemen who were prisoners in the tower at that time thought that their very oldest clothes were good enough to be in prison in, so this splendour that was coming across the garden was very unusual, as well as very dazzling. And before Edred could remember the rules about not speaking till you're spoken to, he found that he had suddenly bowed and said, "Your servant, sir," adding, "You do look ripping." That's the era he's from. Oh dear. You do look ripping. Sorry. I'm just imagining it, because this is in 1605 or whatever it was, which is completely not the sort of thing that you would say back then. Sorry, now I've got the giggles. As well as trying to do something at the same time. Right, we'll carry on. See how you can use that word in day-to-day life, you guys. You folks. See if there's anything you can say that would be an entirely appropriate statement to make. You do look ripping. Very English. "I do not take your meaning," said the gentleman, but he smiled kindly. He obviously understood the intent, even if it wasn't the actual meaning, the heart behind it. "I mean, how splendid you look," said Edred. The old gentleman looked pleased. "I am happy to command your admiration," he said. "I mean, your clothes," said Edred, and then feeling with a shock that this was not the way to behave, he added, "Your face is splendid too." Sorry, "Your face is splendid too, only I've been taught manners, and I know you mustn't tell people they're handsome in their faces. Praise to the face is an open disgrace. Mrs. Honeysett says so." So he's been learning, except that he's still learning how to do it properly. "Praise to my face isn't an open disgrace," said the gentleman. "It is a pleasant novelty in these walls." "Is it your birthday or anything?" Edred asked. "It is not my birthday," said the gentleman, smiling. "But why the question?" "Because you're so grand," said Edred. "I suppose you're a prince, then?" "No, not a prince. A prisoner." "Oh, I see," said Edred, as people so often do when they don't. "And you're going to be let out today, and you've put on your best things to go home in? I am so glad. At least I'm sorry you're going, but I'm glad on your account." I think he might have just put his foot in it. "Thou art a fine, bold boy," said the gentleman, "but no, I am a prisoner, and like to remain so. And for these gauds, not guards, gauds, Gauds, as in gaudy. Something is gaudy, it's extra bright and over the top, okay? As for these gauds, Gauds, and you can look that up and just check the exact meaning of that, because I'm pretty sure it is more specific to things like clothing and that sort of stuff than the context that we use gaudy in these days. So please do, and then put it into the chat. I'd really like to find out, actually, on that one. Sorry, it's now getting cool again. "And as for these gauds," he swelled out his chest so that his diamond buttons and ruby earrings and gem-set collar flashed in the winter sun, "for these gauds never shall it be said that Walter Raleigh let the shadow of his prison tarnish his pride in the proper arraying of a body that has been honoured to kneel before the Virgin Queen." He took off his hat at the last words. And swept it with a flourish nearly to the ground. There you go. That's your illustration here. So here he is in all his fine dressing. So Kel says, extravagantly bright or showy, typically so as to be tasteless. Yes, that's the tastelessness is very much the way we think of gaudy as being. So Right. Definitely more in the to do with the way you present yourself rather than, say, the colour of the picture you have on the wall sort of thing, I would say. I've just got to, I may have to leave because I've got something else going. Someone else has just arrived. We'll find out in a minute. Oh, said Edred. So if I disappear, that'll be why. I'll be back again. Oh, said Edred, are you really Sir Walter Raleigh? Oh, how splendid! And now you'll tell me all about the golden South Americas and sea fights and the Armada and the Spaniards and what you used to play at when you were a little boy. I don't know if these things have all happened, if Walter Raleigh did get out of the tower, and if these were before or after that. Jonathan probably knows. I don't. I don't know my history, and definitely Edred doesn't know his history because he's not quite old enough for this sort of thing. He knows a little bit, but not as much as his sister. Aye, said Sir Walter, I'll tell thee tales enow. That's enough. E-N-O-W. It's an old word. Enow. They'll not let me from speaking with thee. I warrant I would, he said, looking round impatiently, that I could see the river again. From my late chamber I saw it, and the goodly ships coming in and out, the ships that go down into the great waters. He sighed and was silent a moment, then spoke, And so thou didst not know thine old friend Raleigh? He was all forgot, and yet thou hast rid astride my sword ere now, and I have played with thee in the courtyard at Arden. When England forgets so soon, who can expect more from a child? So he thinks he's speaking to the original Edred, or the earlier Edred, not realising he's talking to modern Edred who's come back to this time period. So he recognises Edred. There you go. Oh, I'm sorry, said Edred humbly. Nay, said Sir Walter, pinching his ear gently, 'tis 2 years agone, and short years have short memories. In other words, because you're young, you don't remember as much. Thou shalt come with me to my chamber, and I will show thee a chart and a map of Windargoca, Windargoca, I don't know, never heard of that one at all before, that her dear glorious majesty permitted me to rename Virginia after her great and gracious self. Okay, so yeah, I should have just kept reading. So Windargoca is probably what he understood the locals, the North American Indians, the First Nations people who were there to call the place, and then he, representing the empire that he was discovering on behalf of, named that area Virginia after Elizabeth the Virgin Queen. There you go. I know that bit of history, kind of. Right. After her great and gracious self. So Edred, very glad and proud, went hand in hand with Sir Walter Raleigh to his apartments and saw many strange things from overseas. Oh, this would relieve his boredom. Dresses of feathers from Mexico and strange images in gold from strange islands, and the tip of a narwhal's horn from Greenland. So that's a narwhal, if you're not used to it, if you haven't come across it before. A narwhal is to whales what a unicorn is to horses, except they are real. They really are a type of sea mammal which has a horn out of its head like a unicorn's horn. And I have wondered sometimes if that's where people got the idea from for unicorns. Anyway, right, a narwhal's horn from Greenland and many other things. And Sir Walter told him of his voyages and his fights, and of how he and Humphrey Gilbert and Adrian Gilbert and little Jack Davis used to sail their toy boats in the long stream. So that's children things. Yay. And how they used to row in and out among the big ships down at the port and look at the great figureheads standing out high above the water and wonder about them and about the strange lands they came from. So, do you know what a figurehead is? Not the modern use of the term figurehead, which means one that represents. A figurehead originally was a head or even a body that was on the front of a boat. sailing ships, because it was from the days of when they had sailing ships and they didn't have motorboats. So let's see if I can get that to come up for me. This is a figurehead, except I have to make it bigger for you so you can see it. There you go. Turn it on. No, not that one. That one. That's a figurehead on the bow of a boat. You can't see it very well there, but it's a rather tubby looking boat. If you look at the shape of it as it comes back from where it's splitting the water, it's quite rounded. So this is the sort of boat that Elfrida was looking at from the walkway, and why it was commenting on how tubby the boat was. So there you go. Anyway, carrying on. So they were always intrigued because the figureheads are not all alike. They're not all the same style or anything like that. They're basically done by shipbuilders who are effectively artists in their own right, in their own way. You'd have a series of figureheads on different ships that were all done by the same wood carver, and they would have similarities in style and the use of colour and for the paints that they used and things like this, but they would represent different things. They're not all female either. Sometimes it's just the head, sometimes it's the body down to the waist, all sorts. Anyway, right, don't need all that. Here we go. Used to row in and out among the big ships down at the port and look at the great figureheads standing out high above the water and wonder about them and about the strange lands they came from. Much bigger than little boys. So it looked like a giant's head up there. And often, said Sir Walter, we found a sea captain that would tell us lads travellers' tales like these I have told thee, and we sailed our little ships and then we sailed our big ships as we grew up, and here I lie in dock and shall never sail again, but it's to see the Devon moors and the clear reaches of the long stream again, and that I never shall. And with that he leaned his arm on the window-sill, and if he had not been the great Sir Walter Raleigh, who is in all the history books, Edred would have thought he was crying. He knows what he's lost. Oh, do cheer up, do, said Edred awkwardly. I don't know whether they'll let you go to Devonshire, but I do know they'll let you go back to America some day, with 12 ships. I read about it only yesterday, and your ship will be called the Destiny, and you'll sail from the Thames, and Lord Arden will see you off, and kiss you for farewell, and give you a medal for a keepsake. Your son will go with you. I know it's true. It's all in the book. Oops, he's basically doing the same as what his sister did before. The book? Sir Walter asked. A prophecy, belike? You can call it that if you want to, said Edred, cautiously. But anyhow, it is true. He had read it all in the History of Arden. That's the book he had been reading. So history has been becoming more interesting to Edred than it had been previously, just because of inheriting this castle and the title. If it should be true, said Sir Walter, and the smile came back into his merry eyes, and if I ever sail to the golden west again, shrew me, but I will sack a Spanish town, and bring thee a collar of gold and pieces of 8, a big bag full. Just a moment. No, not an shrew definition. Sorry, it's this word shrew, S-H-R-E-W. Call me a shrew, I think is what they mean. A scolding woman. It's not named after the animal. It's named after the usage of the word normally. Where am I up to? Thank you very much, said Edred. It is very kind of you, but I shall not be there. And all Sir Walter's questions did not make him say how he knew this or what he meant by it. Oh, at least he's being careful now. After this, he met Sir Walter every day in the lieutenant's garden, and the two prisoners comforted each other. At least Edred was comforted, and Sir Walter seemed to be, but no one could be sure if it was more than seeming. This was one of the questions that always puzzled the children, and they used to talk it over together till their heads seemed to be spinning round. The question, of course, was, did their being in past times make any difference to the other people in past times? In other words, when you were taking part in historical scenes, did it matter what you said or did? Of course, it seemed to matter extremely at the time. But then, if this going into the past was only a sort of dream, then of course the people in the past would know nothing about it. That's a good point. Unless they had dreamed the same sort of dream, which, as Elfrida often pointed out, was quite likely, especially if time didn't count or could be cheated by the white clocks. That's part of how the mechanism for time travelling in this story is, which you'll have to go and listen to one of the previous chapters if you want to find out about that, and I can't remember which one, sorry. On the other hand, if they really went into the real past, well then of course what they did must count for real too, as Edred so often said, and yet how could it, since they took with them into the past all that they had learned here? And with that knowledge they could have revealed plots, shown the issue of wars and the fate of kings, and, as Elfrida put it, made history turn out quite different. You see the difficulties, don't you? And Betty Lovell's having said that they could leave no trace on times past did not seem to make much difference somehow one way or the other. Betty Lovell being the wise woman, I think. However, just now Elfrida and Edred were in the tower and not able to see each other, so they could not discuss that or any other question, and they always hoped that they would meet, but they never did. But by and by the Queen thought of Lady Arden, and decided that she and her son Edred ought to be let out of the tower, and she told the king so, and he told Lord somebody or other, who told the lieutenant of the tower, and behold, Lady Arden and Edred were abruptly sent home in their own coach, which had been suddenly sent for from Arden House. It's a bit mean, a bit harsh, because Elfrida's still there. But Elfrida was left in charge of the wife of the lieutenant of the tower, who was a very kind lady. So now Elfrida was in the tower, and Edred was at Arden House in Soho, and they had not been able to speak to each other or arrange any plan for getting back to 1908 and Arden Castle by the sea. Of course, Elfrida was kept in the tower because she had sung the rhyme about "Please to remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot." And this made people think, or seem to think, that she knew all about the gunpowder plot, and so of course she did, though it would have been very difficult for her to show any one of that time how she knew it without being a traitor. She was not allowed to see Lord Arden every day. She was now allowed to see Lord Arden every day, and she grew very fond of him. He was curiously like her own daddy, who had gone away to South America with Uncle Jim and had never come back to his little girl. Lord Arden also seemed to grow fonder of her every day. "Thou art a bold piece," he'd tell her, "and thou growest bolder every day. Hast thou no fear that thy daddy will have thee whipped for answering him so pert?" Because she's not using old-fashioned manners, she's using her own. "No," Elfrida would say, hugging him as well as she could for his ruff. "I know you wouldn't beat your little girl, don't I, Daddy?" And as she hugged him, it felt almost like hugging her own daddy, who would never come home from America. So she was almost contented. She knew that Lord Arden was not one of those to suffer for the gunpowder plot. She knew from the history of Arden that he would just be banished from the court and end his days happily at Arden, and she was almost tempted just to go on and let... Sorry, I'm just trying to get the sense of this, but it doesn't quite make sense. She was almost tempted just to go on and let what would happen and stay with this new daddy, let what would happen and stay with this new daddy who had lived 300 years before and pet him and be petted by him. That sort of dare you, dare you. Only she felt that she must do something because of Edred. The worst of it was that she could not think of anything to do. She did not know at all what was happening to Edred, whether he was being happy or unhappy. As it happened, he was being, if not unhappy, at least uncomfortable. Mr. Parados, the tutor, who was as nasty a man as you could find in any seaside academy for young gentlemen, he's the one who let slip the fact that they knew things, the one who was spying on them. Mr. Parados. The tutor, who was as nasty a man as you will find in any seaside academy for young gentlemen, still remained at Arden House and taught the boys, Edred and his cousin Richard. Mr. Parados was in high favour with the king because he had listened to what wasn't meant for him, reported it where it would do most mischief, a thing always very pleasing to King James I, and Lady Arden dared not dismiss him. Besides, she was ill with trouble and anxiety, which Edred could not at all soothe by saying again and again, "Father won't be found guilty of treason, he won't be executed, he'll just be sent to Arden and live there quietly with you. I saw it all in a book." But Lady Arden only cried and cried. Mr. Parados was very severe and rapped Edred's knuckles almost continuously during lesson time and out of it, and said Cousin Richard, "He is forever bent on spying and browbeating of us." "He's always messing about. Nasty sneak," said Edred. "I should like to be even with him before I go, and I will too." "Before you go? Go whither?" Cousin Richard asked. "Elfrida and I are going away," Edred began, and then felt how useless it was to go on, since even when the 1908 Edred, who he was, had gone, the 1605 Elfrida and Edred would of course still be there. That is, if... He checked the old questions, which he had now no time to consider, and said in a firm tone which was new to him, and which Elfrida would have been astonished and delighted to hear, "Yes, I've got 2 things to do. To be even with old Parrot-Nose, to be revenged on him, I mean, and to get Elfrida out of the tower, and I'll do that first because she'll like to help with the other." The boys were on the leads, their backs to a chimney, on the leads, both written the same way, Leads. The leads we've had before, that's the flat part of the roof or fairly flat part of the roof where they use lead as the roofing to waterproof the area because you can shape lead more easily than most other metals. The boys were on the leads, their backs to a chimney and their faces towards the trapdoor, which was the only way of getting out onto the roof. So they basically are somewhere where Parrot-Nose can't spy on them. It was very cold and the north wind was blowing, but they had come there because it was one of the few places where Mr. Parrot-Nose could not possibly come creeping up behind them to listen to what they were saying. "Get her out of the tower?" Dick laughed and then was sad. "I wish we could," he said. "We can," said Edred earnestly. "I've been thinking about it all the time, ever since we came out of the tower, and I know the way. I shall want you to help me, Dick, you and one grown-up." He spoke in the same grim, self-reliant tone that was so new to him. "One grown-up?" Dick said. "Yes, I think Nurse would do it, and I'm going to find out if we can trust her." "Trust her?" said Dick. "Why, she'd die for any of us Ardens, aye, and die on the rack before she would betray the lightest word of any of us." "Then that's all right," said Edred. "What is thy plot?" Dick asked, and he did not laugh, though he might well have wanted to. You see, Edred looked so very small and weak, and the tower was so very big and strong. "I'm going to get Elfrida out," said Edred, "and I'm going to do it like Lady Nithsdale got her husband out. It will be quite easy." Now, I saw reference to this, just a moment, I'm just going to tell you. Here we go. There's a very, very short page on Wikipedia about this particular book, and it only has like 4 bullet points on it to do with the time periods. So there's 1807, Napoleon's planned invasion of the United Kingdom is referenced in the book. 1705, roughly, a visit from the Chevalier St. George, in quotation marks because it wasn't, the old pretender during the reign of Queen Anne. That's when that bit was. Also known as Chevalier St. George. I'm saying it the more French way just because of how a particular movie that's a family favourite, which they use that term of it. And 1605, the Gunpowder Plot and a meeting with Sir Walter Raleigh, and then there's one other time period apart from their own. But it says here, using the same stratagem that Lady Nithsdale used in 1717. This is 1605, so it hasn't happened yet in the time frame that he's in. Wonder if that's where she got her idea from. It's obviously something that he would have picked up on in school history, maybe. Winifred Maxwell, Countess of Nithsdale, is best known for arranging the daring escape of her husband, William Maxwell, 5th Earl of Nithsdale, from the Tower of London in 1716. Now, she was born in 1699, so that means she was 17 years old at the time. I'm not going to read any further about her because I don't want to spoil what's coming up. I've got a bit of an idea. Right. I'm going to do it like Lady Nithsdale got her husband out, which hasn't yet happened in their history. It will be quite easy. It all depends on knowing when the guard is changed, and I do know that, because he's seen it happening regularly. But how did my Lady Nithsdale get my Lord Nithsdale out, and from what? Dick asked. Why, out of the tower, you know, Edred was beginning, when he remembered that Dick did not know, and couldn't know, because Lord Nithsdale hadn't yet been taken out of the tower. Hadn't even been put in, perhaps, for anything Edred knew. Wasn't even born yet. So he said, never mind, I'll tell you all about Lady Nithsdale, and proceeded to tell Dick, vaguely yet inspiringly, the story of that wise and brave lady. I haven't time to tell you the story, but any grown-up who knows history will be only too pleased to tell it. At the time the book was written, that was part of what people learned at school as part of their history lessons. Obviously we don't now. Not in New Zealand, anyway. Dick listened with most flattering interest. Though it was getting dusk and colder than ever, the lights were lighted in the house and the trapdoor had become a yellow square. A shadow in the square warned Dick, and he pinched Edred's arm. Come, he said, and let us apply ourselves to our books. Virtuous youths always act in their preceptors' absence as they would if their preceptors were present. I feel as though mine were present. Therefore, I take it, I am a virtuous youth. Whatever that's all about. On which the shadow disappeared very suddenly, and the two boys, laughing in a choking inside sort of way, went down to learn their lessons by the light of two guttering tallow candles in solid silver candlesticks. Great to have you here, Aunt. So glad that you can actually be about to have a bit of a rest, a bit of a zizz. That's good. Go for it. I'm glad I put that emote there. I did wonder if it was going to get used ever, but that's good. Carry on. Go to sleep while I'm reading if you want to. Whatever. It's all awesome. Great to have you here, as I said. I'll carry on with what I'm reading so you've got something to listen to. So that was he was saying that, Dick was saying that because they knew that they were being eavesdropped on by Mr. Parrotnose, and I can't remember his proper name. Anyway, and obviously it had the right effect. So he went off. The light of two guttering tallow candles in solid silver candlesticks. The next day, Edred got the old nurse to take him to the court, and because the Queen was very fond of Lady Arden, he actually managed to see Her Majesty, and what is more, to get permission to visit his father and sister in the tower. That's one of our doors squeaking, sorry. The permission was written by the Queen's own hand and bade the Lieutenant of the Tower to admit Master Edred Arden and Master Richard Arden and an attendant. Then the nurse became very busy with sewing, and 2 days went by, and Mr. Parados rapped the boys' fingers and scolded them and scowled at them and wondered why they bore it all so patiently. Then came the day, and it was bitterly cold, and as the afternoon got older, snow began to fall. "So much the better," said the old nurse, "so much the better." It was at dusk that the guard was changed at the tower gate, and a quarter of an hour before dusk Lord Arden's carriage stopped at the tower gate, and an old nurse in ruff and cap and red cloak got out of it and lifted out two little gentlemen, one in black with a cloak trimmed with squirrel fur, which was a done thing back then, which was Edred, and another which was Richard in grey velvet and marten's fur. And the lieutenant was called, and he read the Queen's order and nodded kindly to Edred, and they all went in. And as they went across the yard to the White Tower, where Lord Arden's lodging was, the snow fell thick on their cloaks and furs and froze to the stuff, for it was bitter cold. And again, "So much the better," the nurse said, "so much the better." Elfrida was with Lord Arden, sitting on his knee, when the visitors came in. She jumped up and greeted Edred with a glad cry and a very close hug. "Go with nurse," he whispered through the hug. "Do exactly what she tells you." "But I've made a piece of poetry," Elfrida whispered, "and now you're here." "Do what you're told," whispered Edred in a tone she had never heard from him before, and so fiercely that she said no more about poetry. "We must get you out of this," Edred went on. "Don't be a duffer. Think of Lady Nithsdale." Then Elfrida understood. Her arms fell from round Edred's neck, and she ran back to Lord Arden and put her arms round his neck and kissed him over and over again. "There, there, my maid, there, there," he said, patting her shoulder softly, for she was crying. "Come with me to thy chamber," said the nurse. "I would take thy measure for a new gown and petticoat." Because, remember, they had to supply their own clothing and things. So this was a done thing. But Elfrida clung closer. "She does not want to leave her dad," said Lord Arden. "Dost thou, my maid?" "No, no," said Elfrida, quite wildly. "I don't want to leave my daddy." "Come," said Lord Arden, "'tis but for a measuring time. Thou'lt come back, sock lamb as thou art. Go now to return the more quickly." He thinks she's able to come back again. "Goodbye, dear, dear, dear daddy," said Elfrida, suddenly standing up. "Oh, my dear daddy, goodbye." "Why, what a piece of work about a new frock," said the nurse crossly. "I've no patience with the child," and she caught Elfrida's hand and dragged her into the next room. "Now," she whispered, already on her knees undoing Elfrida's gown, "not a moment to lose. Hold thy handkerchief to thy face and seem to weep as we go out. Why, thou'rt weeping already. So much the better." From under her wide hoop and petticoat, the nurse drew out the clothes that were hidden there, a little suit of black, exactly like Edred's. Cap, cloak, stockings, shoes, all like Edred's to a hair. And Elfrida, before she had finished crying, stood up, the exact image of her brother, except her face, and that would be hidden by the handkerchief. Then very quickly the nurse went to the door of the apartment and spoke to the guard there. "Good luck, good gentleman," she said. "My little master is ill. He's too frail to bear these sad meetings and sadder partings. Convey us, I pray you, to the outer gate, that I may find our coach and take him home, and afterwards I will return for my other charge, his noble cousin." "Is it so?" said the guard kindly. "Poor child. Well, life is life, mistress, and we all have tears to weep." But he could not leave his post as Lord Arden's door to conduct them to the gates. But he told them the way, and they crossed the courtyard alone, and as they went the snow fell on their cloaks and froze there. So that the guard at the gate, who had seen an old nurse and two little boys go in through the snow, now saw an old nurse and one little boy go out, all snow-covered, and the little boy appeared to be crying bitterly, and no wonder, the nurse explained, seeing his dear father and sister thus. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the picture up for you. That one, I think. Yes, there you go. There's the guard at the gate, there's the nurse, and there is Elfrida dressed as Edred. Yes. I will convey him to our coach, good masters, she said to the guard, and return for my other charge, young Master Richard Arden. And on that she got Elfrida in her boy's clothes out at the gate and into the waiting carriage. The coachman, by previous arrangement with the old nurse, was asleep on the box, and the footman, also by previous arrangement, was refreshing himself at a tavern nearby. Under the seat, said the old nurse, and thrusting Elfrida in, shut the coach door and left her, and there was Elfrida, dressed like a boy, huddled up among the straw at the bottom of the coach. So far so good, but the most dangerous part of the adventure still remained. The nurse got in again easily enough. She was let in by the guard who had seen her come out. And as she went slowly across the snowy courtyard, she heard ring under the gateway, the stamping feet of the men who had come to relieve the guard and to be themselves the new guard. So far, again, so good. The danger lay with the guard at the door of Lord Arden's rooms, and in the chance that some of the old guard might be lingering about the gateway when she came out, not with one little boy as they would expect, but with two. But this had to be risked. The nurse waited as long as she dared, so as to lessen the chance of meeting any of the old guard as she went out with her charges. She waited quietly in a corner, while Lord Arden talked with the boys, and when at last she said, "The time is done, my lord," she already knew that the guard at the room door had been changed. As long as they don't pass on messages. "So now for it," said Edred, as he and Richard followed the nurse down the narrow steps and across the snowy courtyard. The new guard saw the woman and the two boys, and the captain of the guard read the Queen's paper which the old nurse had taken care to get back from the lieutenant, and as plainly Master Edred Arden and Master Richard Arden with their attendant had passed in, so now they were permitted to pass out. And 2 minutes later a great coach was lumbering along the snowy streets, and inside it 4 people were embracing in rapture at the success of their stratagem. "But it was Edred thought of it," said Richard, as in honour bound, "and he arranged everything and carried it out." "How splendid of him," said Elfrida warmly, "and I think it was rather splendid of her not to spoil his pride and pleasure at this. The first adventure he had ever planned and executed entirely on his own account. She could very easily have spoiled it, you know, by pointing out to him that the whole thing was quite unnecessary, and that they could have got away much more easily by going into a corner of the tower and saying poetry to the Mouldiwarp. So they came to, well done her for not actually spoiling that. So they came to Arden House. The coachman was apparently asleep again, and the footman went round and did something to the harness after he had got the front door opened, and it was quite easy for the nurse to send the footman, who opened the door, to order a meal to be served at once for Mr. Arden and Mr. Richard, so that no one saw that instead of the 2 little boys who had left Arden House in the afternoon, 3 came back to it in the evening. Then the nurse took them into the parlour and shut the door. "Now," she said, "Master Richard will go and take off his fine suit, and Miss Arden will go into the little room and change her raiment. And for you, Master Edred, you wait here with me." When the others had obediently gone, the nurse stood looking at Edred with eyes that grew larger and different. And he stood looking at her with eyes that grew rounder and rounder. "Why," he said at last, "you're the witch we took the tea and things to." "And if I am," said she, "do you think you're the only people who can come back into other times? You're not all the world yet, Master Arden of Arden, but you've got the makings of a fine boy and a fine young man, and I think you've learned something in these old ancient times." He had, there is no doubt of it. Whether it was being thought important enough to be imprisoned in the tower, or whether it was the long talks he had with Sir Walter Raleigh, that fine genius and great gentleman, or whether it was Mr. Paradox's knuckle rappings and scowlings, I do not know. But it is certain that this adventure was the beginning of the change in Edred, which ended in his being brave and kind and wise, as the old rhyme had told him to be. "And now," said the nurse, as Elfrida appeared in her girl's clothes, "there is not a moment to lose. Already at the tower they have found out our trick. You must go back to your own times." "She's the witch," Edred briefly answered, the open amazement. Sorry, excuse me. The open amazement in Elfrida's eyes. "There's no time to lose," the nurse repeated. "I must be even with the old Parados first," said Edred, and so he was, and it took exactly 20 minutes, and I will tell you all about it afterwards. When he was even with old Parados, the old nurse sent Richard to bed, then Elfrida made haste to say, "I did make some poetry to call the Mouldiwarp, but it's all about the tower, and we're not there now. It's no use saying, 'Oh, Mouldiwarp, you have the power to get us out of this beastly tower,' because it's got to be unique poetry. It has to be new. It can't have been used before, so they can't use a rhyme that they've made up before. When we're not in the tower, and I can't think of anything else, and..." But the nurse interrupted her. "Never mind about poetry," she said. "Poetry's all very well for children, but I know a trick worth two of that." She led them into the dining room, where the sideboard, that's the set of drawers and cupboards that you put things on, like when food is arranged and you come and help yourself to it, that's the sideboard. It's also a place for storing valuable plates and crockery and stuff used for serving guests. She led them into the dining room, where the sideboard stood covered with silver, set down the candle, lifted down the great salver with the arms of Arden engraved upon it, and put it on the table. A salver is like a serving tray. She breathed on the salver and traced triangles and a circle on the drilled surface, and as the mistiness of her breath faded and the silver shone out again undimmed, there suddenly, in the middle of the salver, was the live white Mouldiwarp of Arden, looking extremely cross. Sorry, I'm just trying to find what the next picture is, because I'm pretty sure you need it now. Not that one, this one. There he is. There's the Mouldiwarp. There's the nurse, and there's Elfrida, and he's extremely cross. "You've no manners," it said to the nurse, "bringing me here in that offhand, rude way, without with your leave or by your leave." Elfrida could easily have made some poetry. "You know well enough," it added angrily, that it's positively painful to me to be summoned by your triangles and things. Poetry is so easy and simple." "Poetry's too slow for this night's work," she said. "Come, take the children away. I have done with it." "You make everything so difficult," said the Mouldiwarp more crossly than ever. "That's the worst of people who think they know a lot and really only know a little, and pretend they know everything. If I'd come the easy poetry way, I could have taken them back as easily, but now, well, it can't be helped. I'll take them back, of course, but it'll be a way they won't like. They'll have to go onto the top of the roof and jump off." Yes, he's very cute when he's being cross, when you see how small he is. "I don't believe that is necessary," said the witch nurse. "All right," said the Mouldiwarp, "get them away yourself then," and it actually began to disappear. "No, no," said Elfrida, "we'll do anything you say." "There's a foot of snow on the roof," said the witch nurse. "So much the better," said the Mouldiwarp. "So much the better. You ought to know that." "You think yourself very clever," said the nurse. "Not half so clever as I am," said the Mouldiwarp, rather unreasonably, Elfrida thought. "There," it added sharply, as a great hammering at the front door shattered the quiet of the neighbourhood, of the night. "There, to the roof for your lives, and I'm not at all sure it's not too late." The knocking was growing louder and louder. And that's the end of the chapter. She does like cliffhanger endings in this book, doesn't she? More so than in any of the other books we've read of hers. And I'm going to stop there because it's 20 to 5 and that's time for me to start getting the rest of the house things ready and all that sort of stuff. I'm getting hungry now, actually. I think I want some lunch, but it's nearly dinner time. Anyway, what do you think? What's going to happen? They're going to have to jump off the roof, but then what happens? They land in the snow? I don't know. This is odd. I really don't know what's going to happen next. Well, we'll find out next time, I'm sure. So today's Wednesday. I read Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 p.m. New Zealand time, unless something happens, which means that I can't. Usually, if that's the case, I will try to either put a post up on Instagram saying I can't, along with it cross-posting to Facebook and to Twitter very late in the day. or I will try to put a note on my schedule on my Twitch page to say that I haven't been able to, that I've actually cancelled that day's reading. Just because sometimes with elderly relatives, you have to take someone down to the hospital for a checkup for something. And because of the way hospitals work, when they give you an appointment, you go to that appointment. You don't try to change it because you may never get an appointment again. Yeah, that's just the way they are. Anyway, thank you for being here. It's been great having you all here, being part of the story, being part of the fun. I look forward to seeing you next time. And in the meantime, happy reading.